Hi, everyone. I'm David Marinak. In today's episode, you're going to meet Franklin DeFord, 75 years old, 75 years young, and he is actually a great breath of fresh air when it comes to not just packaging sales, but sales in general. Honesty, integrity, doing it the right way. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Hello, and welcome to the Repackaging Revolution. I'm your host, David Marinak. Now, before I introduce our guests, let's start with what I like to call our podcast statement or power statement. You can have the best product in the world, but if you can't sell it, you're wasting your time. Today's guest not only has a sales background, but a strong manufacturing background as well, which gives him a unique perspective in the U.S. manufacturing space. He's run and managed factories, is an entrepreneur who has started companies from scratch to represent different industrial products over the years, including what we'll talk a lot about today, packaging, industrial and retail packaging for American-made packaging in Cartersville, Georgia. He's 75 years young and has no intention of slowing down, is an inspiration to us all. Franklin DeFord, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Well, let's dig in here, pal. I mean, I'm just excited because, you've got a unique perspective. Obviously, we're going to touch base on your background a little bit, what kind of got you to American-made packaging, if you will. But take us back a little bit. I mean, you've got the background when it comes to as a draftsman, and mechanical design. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of how you got into that world.
There was a new startup company in my hometown in Loudon, Tennessee.
Yep.
I was privileged to be able to apply and get a job with those folks. It was known as Marymount Corporation. And we did exhaust systems for automotive. It was for the aftermarket, not for the OEM market.
Oh, got it. Yep.
For the aftermarket. And we had quite a business, and we were actually used in some cases by the University of Tennessee as a model company. So they would bring folks down to review the management styles, and we were state of the art as far as warehousing and manufacturing at the time.
Kind of like a just-in-time kind of thing at that point? I mean,
Well,
before
no,
its time?
it was not, but we had a very good reputation for shipment, and they built that on service, and the people in manufacturing, of course, supplied the warehousing, and there was like 11 acres under one roof.
No
and that
kidding.
was at the time was almost unheard of.
Right.
So we had a very apt management team, and I was privileged to be at the bottom of that ladder and work with some guys that I had a lot of respect for.
In that world of mechanical engineering, mechanical design, draftsman, were you at for example, give me a little bit of a background, not even a background, give me some info. Were you drafting up things from scratch? Were people coming to you saying, hey, we've got this new idea?
Right. Right.
Tell me a little bit about how that kind of came to be.
We did that. We were dealing with the company originated in Chicago, and so they had moved this plant down to our hometown. So they had a lot of old equipment that we moved down. So we adapted some of the old equipment, and part of my job was to refurbish the old tooling or materials like that. If a machine broke, sometimes you couldn't buy the part.
So I was just going to say, yeah, exactly.
It in a machine shop, and we had a full facility, in that we had engineering and machine shops and an adept maintenance department, and it was just we had when I left, there was 1,000 employees and 100 hourly employees and 125 office employees. So it was quite a large company, and we supplied people like Sears and Roebuck and those major retailers where they have. I guess Walmart has it all now, but
right.
where you pull your car in and get your get your exhaust changed and all that. And so we supplied them. We started out supplying them with 10%. The salespeople went out and solicited the business from Sears, And they said, well, we'll let you have 10%. Well, by the time we got everything, all the paperwork done, they said, we're just going to let you have it all. So we took over that business and did quite well. And plus, the other Napas and people like that we supplied in the
It's
warehouse.
interesting, and I know that we're going to dig deeper into the sales side of things, but that's something that I try to teach our folks, and I think you can relate to this. A lot of times, these young sales reps in any business want to go for the jugular. They want all that business. They want all of it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, we try to teach our guys, be a backup. Don't go in there trying to sell them everything at this particular point. Take that 10% and make it the best and do the best you can with that, because invariably the incumbent is going to eventually falter. They're going to have problems and issues. And a lot of times it's a turnoff when sales reps are going, oh, I got to have everything. I got to have everything right now. But if they start slower and really perfect, actually, we use the terminology, be a second string quarterback initially, and then work your way into the starting quarterback position. But I've often found that so many reps want to go for that big home run when getting a single, so to speak, Franklin, is probably a safer bet, and actually to really build into that business. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And from the purchasing standpoint, which I've been in purchasing, and when a guy comes in off the street or you get a phone call or whatever, and he introduces himself and say, I'm so and so, and I represent a company, you don't know if he's legit or if he's not. You don't know what kind of company he's got. So if you give him an opportunity and at 10%, and he comes in and does a pretty good job, then you're more apt to trust him to do the rest of it. And that's kind of what you're teaching or what you're purporting is very exactly what I like to do, because I want to build somebody's trust.
Correct.
When you hear the word sales, sometimes you conjure up this idea of, but I try to make friends with the folks, and I want to be their friend, and I want to be honest in my business, and integrity is the key thing, I think.
And I love these conversations. And you and I were chatting off, and a lot of times when guys like you and I, who are basically colleagues in this world, as yes, we've got sales and we've done a lot of different things. But I really love it because you're really speaking my language as well. When you go for becoming friends, partners, trying to legitimately help the other client, that's when it becomes that kind of strong partnership. That's when it becomes that where everybody's beginning to really look out for each other. And if there's anything I could teach the young reps that are out there, you just nailed it, is starting out by looking to build a friendship, looking to build a partnership, trying to build a relationship. That doesn't mean you have to go to church on Sundays necessarily together, but we're talking about forming a friendship, a relationship, something that in turn, because oftentimes, and I don't know if you remember those days, but it seems so long ago. If you were talking, whether it was a buyer or a business owner or whoever it may be, when you have a relationship, they're more apt to say, hey, Franklin, we're really, really tight on this particular project. We have a problem here. We have a need.
Right.
Can you help us? Versus the traditional, what we've all seen here of the last 10, 20 years, where I'm the buyer, you're the seller. I'm the buyer, I don't share anything, but and that just doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't work. And it's such a flawed system these days that like you said, the trust goes right out the window when it's, I'm in charge, you're not, or you're in charge and I'm not. And that just doesn't work.
That's right. I've had customers come to me and say, do you know somebody that can help us with this problem?
Correct.
And to me, that's the ultimate compliment, that they trust you enough to recommend somebody else to help them out. And like I say, it's all about working together, and I'm there, to sell and to help myself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel obligated to help somebody else, and I'm a Christian man, and I try to do the right thing. But sometimes helping other folks is what we need to do.
Well, and again, another bit of a segue is you're that throwback, which is again, I didn't necessarily mean to kind of go into different directions, but forgive me. You mentioned something that really is important as well. When you're honest and upfront and willing to share information with a customer, even a prospect, that builds more goodwill, even if, especially if you're not the guy. For example, and I think you'll relate to this, where somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, do you know anybody that can do X?" Well, that may not be your core business. That may not be
Right.
something, but you know what? Yeah, I do. Ironically, there's a guy that I worked with in the past. That is such a lost art. And I don't mean to sound like it's an art form, but it's such a lost thing that people don't think about because it seems like the sales reps of today, not just in the packaging space, but in general, the sales reps of today, they want to get it all, have it all and control it all. And by doing that, they end up getting nothing, or they don't have any sort of semblance of trust with whether the buyer or decision maker. And
Yeah.
it's just really a frustrating thing to watch because that's something that, man, I just want to go back and teach these people all over again. This is how it's
Yeah.
supposed to be done. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Well, you got to live with yourself too. You can't just uh, go off the deep end and like you say, try to grab everything at one time. And
Well, and I've seen that too, Franklin, where, and again, even when, we've all made mistakes in particular where we think that, we have an opportunity where we're the only game in town. And that may be the case. And that's perfect. But you still want to do the right thing. You still want to make your usual markup, but at the end of the day, we have to live with ourselves and look at ourselves in the mirror, and we
true.
also have to be able to kind of share with our underlings or associates that you know what, this is fair business is good business, where no one's looking to
Right.
be the winner and the loser. This is about forming that relationship that lasts much longer, and I know you've had this where people have left companies that you worked with before and remembered you because you are a stand up guy and you're able to walk into other factories. I can see that from your background. And I know that again, when we do the right thing and that stays with you wherever you go. Is that a fair
Yeah.
statement?
Yeah. It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, I think the ultimate compliment is for somebody to ask you to help them with a project that
Correct.
you have nothing to do with, really.
Correct. 100% agreed. So take us from there. So when you left that company, the aftermarket automotive, you kind of
Right.
got into, was it the glass business?
Yeah,
Something like, tell me a little bit more.
I went to a company that was a glass fabricator, and we did glass for the appliance industry. All the major appliances, GEs, the Whirlpools. At that time, it wasn't that large. I think when I went there, there must have been 15 or 20 appliance manufacturers. But now it's whittled down, to just a few in the U.S.,
Right.
which is
Right.
Whirlpool and General Electric,
Right.
and even General Electric now is owned by Haier
Right.
out of China.
Yep.
But we supplied most of the major manufacturers and some that wasn't so major, some smaller appliance people. And what we did was we decorated the glass and tempered it for oven doors. And
I was just
at the
going to
time,
ask you. There you go. Got it. You
at
just
the
nailed it.
time, the background or the back guards where you turn the knobs on and off and
Yep.
all that was all glass,
I'll be
and
done.
sometimes it would be multicolors. So we did that, and with ceramic ink. And when you put ceramic ink on a glass, and then you heat it up to about
Yep.
1,350 degrees, and then you smack it with air to temper it, you make it about 3 times as strong as it would have been otherwise. So we did all of that and drilled holes in it, and we did everything you could do to glass and sent it out to our customers. Again, it was a great privilege for me to work for that company. And when I started, I left, as I said a while ago, I left Marymount with 1,000 employees and 125 office staff. when I got there, we had 52 people total. It was privately owned, and the two guys that I was working for eventually bought the company, and then we went gangbusters from there. It was just quite a ride, and I enjoyed the ride myself.
What did you do there? Were you in the factory? Were you doing sales? Were you a little bit of everything?
I was not in sales for a long time. I worked there for 14 years, and in manufacturing. And I went there as an engineering manager, which I don't have a degree in engineering, but I had some knowledge of mechanicals,
Sure,
things of that nature. So I went there, and when I got there, I was it. There was nobody else, and some of the guys out in the plant were mechanical minded, so they did repairs and stuff like that. And so I began to try to build a maintenance department, and we did that. And then slowly we started all the support departments, like the purchasing department, the personnel department, anything that supported the group. And eventually we came to quality control. The appliance industry basically forced us into doing quality control, and so we could report.
Right.
We had we had to backtrack anything. We'd have a record of it. And so
which makes sense, but I also know exactly where you're coming from as well, because I too have been around a while, and I remember when all the QC reporting and that kind of paperwork, it makes sense to do it so you can document changes and things that have happened or whatever. But I also too remember those days when it was like, yeah, did Franklin do it? Yep. All right, it's done right. Okay, let's go. Versus all this other kind of stuff. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it was like I said, to me, it was a great privilege to be a part of that. We had a great workforce, and the people I worked with, we became like a family.
Yep.
I guess that was probably, as work concerned, that was probably the best 14 years of my life, to be able to do that and work with the people I worked with, and I just have to give them kudos for being there and being cooperative. And like I said, we became a family. If you needed somebody to work overtime, or if you needed whatever you needed, they were there to do the job, including the president and the vice president. I mean,
I was just going to say, are they still in business now?
Oh yeah, they are. They've original owners sold out. They were bought by a German company called Schott. And then now Schott has sold them to a company called SSW, who has been in the appliance industry for years and years, doing the grates, like the racks that go in ovens and things like that. And they have expanded out and do several things in the appliance industry now. So they've taken, I think we were probably, when I left there, Schott had just taken over, and we were probably, without bragging, we were probably number one in the world.
Wow.
Doing what we did.
Right.
With 260 employees, and we were probably, I think we were putting out like $3 million a month in sales.
Wow.
And so it was a great, I tell you what, that $3 million looks like. It's 6 truckloads of glass a day.
Wow.
So
yeah. And that in and of itself too, I just kind of got that flashback to the days when I got into this space as well, and it wasn't the glass, but working with companies and for companies that had people like you and groups of people like you that just got stuff done, that just sort of like, Franklin and Sam, this is what we need. Go figure it out. Right. And that's a real throwback as well, because
fun. It's
100%, especially like you said, especially when you don't necessarily have the formal training per se. You have to use beyond that. You got to think beyond the book smarts into, hey, I know if I do this, and I bet you if we do that, that in and of itself is how America was made.
Well, I had a supervisor in maintenance And I often told him that it took the two of us to make one good engineer. And we did a lot of work together,
Right.
and he be there again. He was a friend coming in that I had been acquainted with, but as we worked together, we became real fast friends. And as I can't iterate it enough, how the people there were just come together as a family.
Are they, I know you said they're still operational, but is that factory and that some of those folks
It
still
is.
there?
It's
Okay.
located in Sweetwater, Tennessee, and they
Okay.
have sister factories now. We got two in Mexico and
Wow.
one in Canada. And the original company was from Canada. It's called Daysco Corporation. When the two guys bought the Sweetwater plant, we eventually took over the Canadian plant and then bought another plant in Vincennes, Illinois, or Vincennes, Indiana.
Right.
So we were in the growth mode, and I'm proud to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's very cool. I love stories like that, and again, because it's like we try to teach our kids too. You don't necessarily, and again, in the world we live in right now with the high tech technology and phones and electronics, that's old school in the appliance glass. Those are the things that are behind the curtain, so to speak, where it's not nearly as forward facing, but you can make a ton of money if you do that right. And it sounds like
Yeah,
those guys kept parlaying that on, and
they
good for
did.
them. Good for them.
They did.
Yeah.
And the guys that own the company, they treated us good and took care of us monetarily and otherwise.
Yeah.
And I can't say enough good things about them. I'm still friends with them today.
Nice. Nice. How about
The
that?
the
So
president that was president, the one that was
when
president
you
was there. He's 86 now, and
is
I
that right?
talk to him about once a month. He lives in Canada,
Ah, nice.
but it's still a good contact and good fellowship.
Boy, in this whole area too, you're talking about Tennessee and up through the East Coast. I'm in Ohio. I did a lot of work back in the day with the Hoover Company vacuum cleaners, and
Right,
they used a couple of companies in Western Ohio that were very heavy appliance, molded foam and things when it came to more of the shipping
right.
side of things, or shipping washing machines and dryers and things. And it that too was one of those small places that kind of kept growing and growing and growing, and
Yeah,
eventually
I can tell you
tipped
who that
over.
is.
Is that
Sunoco.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, the company is Sunoco.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I'll tell you, it was such an interesting place, and again, good hardworking people. Everybody was there just doing the right thing. They, not Sunoco now, but the Hoover. I mean, speaking of Hoover, they're now owned by a Chinese overseas company too, of all
Right,
things.
right.
So it's
Yeah.
just interesting, the state of the times. So you left there, then you started your own rep agency, the DeFord Company, which is still
I,
in business now. Tell us
right.
about that, and then we'll dig
Well,
into some
when I
packaging
when I
stuff.
left, I left to go with a company that sold glassworking equipment,
Mm,
and so I sold the equipment for a while, and along with I did conveyors and racks and the general material handling stuff, along
yep,
with
yep.
the equipment, and then had the opportunity to go back with the guy that had was the president of Gemtron. When he left as president, he went into the rep business and was repping for Gemtron.
Mm,
So I had the opportunity to go back to work with him.
hmm.
I worked with his rep company and eventually took over that company.
I'll be darned.
And so I continued to rep Gemtron for a number of years, and along the way I picked up some other factories and companies, and I've done a little bit of everything. Just when you're in business for yourself,
Yep.
you find a way to try to make it, and that's what I've done over the years, and I've dealt with other folks and got uh, been able to take some of them into the appliance industry. Some of it worked out good, some of it didn't, and that comes down to what we've discussed previously about good and
Sure.
bad companies.
Right.
And
Right.
So they're out there, and when you're a rep, unless you check them out really good or have some good recommendations, you don't know that.
Yep.
And so you kind of have to try them on and see where they are, and unfortunately, sometimes it don't work out too good.
Yeah, and that is also an interesting subject as well, because a lot of us that are involved with whether it's repping different companies, repping different products, different industries, you're so spot on. And I don't know what you had done in the past, or that would have vetted those companies, because we've all been burned before, Franklin. This isn't anything towards you, but what I'm saying is, there really wasn't. Nowadays with the internet, you can kind of trace some people back, but a
Yeah,
lot of times in the early days of being a rep, you're just going on somebody's name. You're dealing
right,
with that particular person, and that's a very difficult spot to be in. But lesson for all people in that space is do your homework. I know it sounds
right,
really, really enticing when somebody offers big money and a salary or whatever it may be, but at the end of the day, they still need to be able to, we need to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror, make
right.
sure that this company is above board, that they can pay their bills, that everybody is kind of swimming in the same direction. But I too, you're not alone. We've all been with certain companies that just didn't work. It wasn't
Yeah,
good at
even when
all.
you check them out the best you can, don't always work out. But uh,
Correct.
you eventually come down to where we are.
So let's just stay with that, and then we'll kind of, because that rep agency is kind of a segue into the packaging space that you're now getting involved in. Is that a fair statement? Where
Yes,
you're kind of
yes,
in, and the thing I love about talking with you is you're always open to thinking about things differently. And I think that goes back to your draftsman, mechanical drafting days, all that kind
yeah,
of stuff, because a lot of times the best people in the packaging space don't necessarily follow the guidelines. For example, some of our best success stories have been packaging and packaging solutions that weren't even intended for that particular product. For example, you mentioned material handling. And I was working with a company here in Ohio called Craftmade. And they're a big, they've since been bought out by Masco, but they're basically a semi custom cabinet maker. And never in a million years did I think that I would be in that space, but I happened to, through a relationship, introduced to this guy he was an engineer, but he was basically that kind of, call Tim Boothby whenever you have a problem, call Tim. And long story short, I had met him, and he had said that they were booming. Talk about kind of perfect framework, Franklin. This was just at the outset of Home Depot really coming up the East Coast. Remember, they started out in Atlanta, they
yes,
came up of course, they were in Texas. But when they really started getting into the Midwest and they were opening stores left and right, Craftmade was their go-to, was their main cabinet maker, that when you would go into Home Depot, and what they also did, which was brilliant, is they had a computer that was sitting right there. So you, your wife, my wife, whatever, could go in there and design your own cabinet, kitchen, the whole entire kitchen on a computer model, click the button and place your order, and that would feed down to Craftmade, and they would go make these. So
right,
suddenly Craftmade went from a couple of thousand cabinets a month to literally like 15,000 full kitchens every week. So they've just exploded and exploded. But the point is that they brought me in and they said, look, we are having problems moving these finished pieces of cabinets from one side of a factory to another. And it wasn't that. There were two things that were happening. Number one, these cabinets were very heavy, but the other part of this was that the cabinets were very susceptible to scratching. And, when you have a very fine mahogany cabinet or whatever it may be, if
yeah,
it's piled up against another piece of mahogany, it's going to scratch. And if
sure,
somebody's spending 15, 20, $30,000 for a brand new kitchen, the last thing they want to do is have anything scratched. So it brings that whole story full circle, and the fact that what we did was we had to replace a wood cart. They literally had pieces of wood with wheels, and they would push these finished cabinets from one side of a factory to another to put on the screws and bolts and doors or whatever. And that was very heavy, very abrasive, very difficult to push by hand. And we kind of had to, again, like you were describing, had to think of things differently, had to look at this and say, okay, what could we possibly use to make a material handling cart that would be less weight and less abrasive? So we came up with and I don't know if you're familiar, but in the world of corrugated paper, there's also plastic corrugated, meaning plastic can be made and is very durable, or can be made very durable, lightweight, long lasting, can be coated with a substrate to make it non-abrasive. And the reason why I shared that little story was that's kind of what you brought to mind, of looking at things differently, looking at the ability to kind of say, I'm in the glass, or I have a background in the glass and the manufacturing and designing these things, but this could work in this situation. And I think that's very old school in a complimentary way, that's something we're missing out there, because a lot of times solutions aren't going to be like right out of a book. The solutions that we find or develop, or sometimes there's going to be a lot of trial, error. It wasn't like it took us a long time to design these carts and then we sold thousands of them. But the thing is that, a lot of people are impatient, or they assume that if they can't find the solution in Granger or Uline or something like that, then it doesn't exist. And I almost really want to hark back to the days of, no, we'd probably have to create this from scratch, and combination of things. But I digress. You just really reminded me and took me back to those days with CraftMate and trying to find solutions that aren't necessarily in a book.
And that's kind of what I'd like to do. Just because you're using a stretch wrap, or because you're using a certain foam or whatever in packaging right now, does not mean that it's the very best that you got. Sometimes you can get a better product at a less cost.
Yep.
If you know what you're doing. And I'm new to trying to sell packaging, but I'm not new to the packaging game.
Right.
And so we've had to design packages and create packaging for places that I've been, and in doing that, I have access to a lot of great companies. That can do that. Like, for instance, I know Gregory Manufacturing, and have done a little work with them and for them. They make a great returnable container. They do a lot of returnables for glass windshields.
Oh, yeah.
They do a lot of returnables for the glass industry itself, from the fabricator all the way back to the manufacturer of glass. I feel like that I can offer you a good package of whatever you need, whether it be putting orange juice in a little cup, or if you want to make windshields for cars.
Right. And that really, in essence, is what makes this special, because you are not looking at this as a one size fits all. And like you said, your background is so unique that you're able to look at these things and say, you know what, if it's juice in a cup, that's one thing. But if it's an industrial material handling container that needs to move glass, that's another. But that's a special skill set. That's not something that everybody does on a regular basis.
And it's hard to sell. I mean,
yes.
Because when you go in, people don't know who you are.
Yep.
They don't care who you are, really.
Right.
And most of the time, they're looking for the cheapest price. And that's what we've. That's the thing that I see that's a detriment to all manufacturing right now, is just looking for the cheapest price. I know you got to be competitive. Cheapest does not always mean it's less expensive.
100%. It's not, one of the things we've often said here too is cheap doesn't mean total lowest cost. And oftentimes, and I too, you opened up a can of worms in a good way for me as well with that, because I don't know if you So I tell stories like this that, 25 years ago, when I was trying to sell the Hoover Company or Moen Faucets or whoever it may be, and I think you can relate to this. When I would walk in and those companies had 15 or 20 different buyers, Franklin. One guy handled
Right.
steel, one guy handled plastic, one guy handled
Right.
commodities, one guy handled, shop floor stuff.
Right.
Well, the industry's changed where they eliminated all those guys, and they put one person in there, and that's Betty the clerk, and they
Yeah.
call her a buyer, but Betty the clerk. Now, Betty the clerk's whole game, and it is a game, is cheapest price, cheap. But where I think this is such a tremendous opportunity for guys like you and me and the industry is COVID really exposed Betty the clerk buyer, for example. And I don't know if you agree with this, but so Betty the clerk buyer, it really, when COVID hit and a lot of companies suddenly kind of were exposed, they came across and kind of represented themselves as a manufacturer. But when COVID hit and nobody could get anything and, stuff was backed up in Long Beach or whatever, clearly they started to find out that Granger wasn't a manufacturer. Uline wasn't a manufacturer.
Right.
Berlin Packaging wasn't a manufacturer, all that kind of stuff. And what was interesting to me, because I would field these calls, is Betty the clerk buyer, because we're online and do a lot of things online. Betty the clerk buyer would call day after day after day. For example, this is where and it wasn't just this one person. So, for example, get a call during COVID, and it's Betty the clerk buyer saying, "Hey, I'm looking for such and such. Do you have this?" No, but I've got it coming in, or whatever it may be. Okay, well, I'll call you back later. The next day she calls with the same message. Do you have it now? No, Betty, I just talked to you yesterday. I don't have it. The third day, Betty calls back. And it was kind of like, okay, Betty, why are you calling me? You and I have talked now 3 times in a row. Well, because the boss told me to make those calls every single day. Okay, Betty, but are you able to think this through a little bit? And the reason why I share that, Franklin, is not to knock Betty the buyer clerk. It's to knock the fact that people aren't thinking. Now, if I told you I don't have it, but I'll have it in 2 weeks, or if I told you we can get it for you, but it's going to take a month or whatever, but so much of the modern day buyer is not a buyer anymore. They're a clerk. They do what the computer tells them to do, and they do whatever comes across their computer screen. Hence, the thought of, well, cheapest price is that's cheapest price. And I just, man, if there's anything out there that just grates at me, is the fact that really and truly at the end of the day is not going to be the cheapest price. It's going to be a real problem. I can always give you a cheap price. Stuff may not arrive, may not be
Right.
right. Paperwork will be wrong. It'll arrive late. All those kind of things. And it's just like, are you kidding me? This is crazy.
Yeah. And that which creates a problem for guys like us.
Yep.
In trying to get to the decision maker.
Yep.
And if you can, there's somebody there that makes decisions, that knows that the bottom line is what's really important,
Right.
then I think we can do business. But to go on price is, I personally don't like that. But
I agree.
It's hard to get around it.
100%. And you also mentioned something that's really critical, is getting to the decision maker. Oftentimes the decision maker is clearly not Betty the clerk buyer. It is somebody there that's got skin in the game that needs to solve a problem. And that's when, if we want to do something properly and really be able to solve a pain point, make a couple of bucks, and really become that partner for a client, it's getting past that person looking for cheap, getting to that person that's a decision maker that really understands the cost of not having the product, the cost of having the product come in late, the cost of having it be damaged when it arrives at the factory, whatever that may be. And it's just really sad that the common Betty the clerk doesn't think like that. They just cheap,
Well,
cheap, 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 cheap.
yeah, and in defense of her, the Betty the clerk,
Yeah.
she's probably got more on her plate than she can get accomplished.
Oh, without a doubt, because we remember, like, the original point is they let go of the 15 buyers
Right,
that were there.
right.
They throw
So
it
she
all
don't
on
have
her.
time. She don't have time to
Exactly.
see anybody or take them out in the
No.
plant and say, "Here's what we got." And
Yep.
they don't have time to do that.
She's putting out
If
fires.
they've been buying on a regular basis from Uline,
Yep.
they're going to continue to buy from Uline regardless of the cost.
Correct.
And
And change is just so they're so resistant to change. It takes so long to kind of get anybody to get beyond or get past. It's so easy as a creature of habit, Franklin, for somebody to keep buying from Uline and to keep going down that road until they get to the point where they realize that Uline doesn't have what they're looking for, and they're not going to have it. So I digress. But
well, I started out when I was a buyer. My boss wanted, he had a setup with a supply house and had it on cards and all that sort of stuff. Didn't have computers back in those days. We just bought from the same company all the time, regardless of what it was. We bought from the same company. Well,
yep.
when I got to be in control myself at another company, the lady that was working for me, I said, when a guy comes in off the street and says he wants to see me, if I'm not here, you go ahead and make the appointment. And when I'm back in the office, I'll meet that appointment because so many times I've had somebody come in off the street that had exactly what I was looking for.
Yep.
And was able to help me.
Right.
And, and in turn, I was able to help them because of the buying, the contacts. And it's just not that way anymore.
That's right. And you're definitely a throwback. And I agree with you 100% because there's a lot of value in that and a lot of value in looking at alternatives, a lot of value at looking behind or beyond just what a brochure shows or a business card and really looking to kind of, like you said, sometimes there's a lot of solutions that are out there that people don't even realize exist.
That's right. That's right.
Well, for our listeners, Franklin was gracious enough to join me on this little. I'm going to share a document for a couple of packaging items and styles and materials. Nothing more than just to kind of, I wanted to share A, with Franklin, B, also with our listeners and viewers, that there's a lot of new materials and styles that are out there in the packaging space. While I put this out earlier in 2023, a lot of the styles and a lot of these materials are still very valid for 2024 and going forward. Now, one of the things I wanted to just throw out there, Franklin, whether this fits in your world or not, but I don't know if you can see my screen, this carbonated beverage, this beer pouch, this black bag. One of the things that I think as any sales rep that's out there looking to kind of get involved with a new technology, and be able to kind of be and have very little competition. Carbonated beverages, not just beer, soda pop, sparkling water, even into, forget beverages, get into fermented vegetables and sauerkrauts and some of this, a lot of that outgas that traditionally these types of carbonated products or outgassing products had to be packaged in something very rigid or glass, Franklin, back in the days. Now we're able to make the film so it breathes. So yes, it still holds the liquid, but it also breathes, meaning if a bag didn't breathe and release an outgas, that bag would keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it would pop. And why I share that one initially, not just with you, Franklin, but our listeners, is because when looking at glass, the cost of glass versus the cost of flexible film in this case, the pricing is probably about 85% less. They ship flat, they store flat, they are recyclable. There's just a lot of things that a lot of people don't realize that in this space of breathable film, many people don't even know A, it's available, B, that it's possible, and C, that it actually, you don't have to be Budweiser or Coors in volume. This is something that's readily available if you know what that is. And basically, what you would call that is breathable film. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I always find these little things, and I think it's kind of cool. One of the others that I really wanted to show you too was this. If you can see, the other thing that I believe has such tremendous potential out there is replacing rigid buckets and pails, things that notorious or were historically rigid, whether that be in liquid detergent, whether that be in buckets and pails for chemicals. I shared that picture, that middle one there. It's got a measuring cup and a handle. That probably holds about 5 gallons of product. And what we designed that one for, Franklin, which was kind of cool. This was a company that is a industrial plumber, meaning they're not going to the individual houses for plumbing. They're going to like a backed up street pipe, and not necessarily a water main break, but they were, a big time outfit. And this would be filled with this very, very nasty and strong chemical. And what I like about these kind of applications is, number one, it's not going to be massive volume. No one's going to buy millions of these things. However, no one's going to make, these things to begin with. And as a new rep out there in the packaging space, to know that you can make large scale flexible pouches to eliminate or compete with the rigid buckets and pails. 5-gallon buckets and 5-gallon pails are probably $3 and $4 a piece. This is probably going to cost you about 75 cents out the door, custom printed. And the other cool thing about this too was, and this was part of the design, if you see the red nozzle at the top, they wanted a measuring cup, just because the guys on the trucks that would pour this into the pipes when they were on scene, is they didn't need to literally pour an entire 5 gallons into the pipe. They needed a certain kind of, because it was very concentrated. So I love those kind of applications, just because most people don't understand or aren't aware that you can actually do this in a flexible film. Very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think it's very apt that you are able to do that today.
Well, and then the other thing too, when you talk about, and bringing this full circle, when you talk about total lowest cost, it's not the total. It's not just the lower price per piece. A bucket or pail is $3, and this is 75 cents.
Right.
Also, to really and truly encourage that company to even consider this, think about the savings when it comes to how much storage space it takes for a truckload of buckets. Yes, they stack together, but they really aren't collapsible. Think about the amount of energy it takes to make those, or to shred them up and recycle those. Whereas you're dealing with something that's, obviously much thinner, ships flat, stores flat, again, can be thrown away and recycled. It's one of those things that I think a lot of people are unaware of, something like this that's available.
Yeah, definitely for storage space of incoming product. That's
correct.
It's a great thing. I mean, you could probably put 100 of those bags in a 5-gallon pail, right?
Easily, exactly. And the other one I wanted to share with you too, and I didn't want to go too far down this road because you've been gracious to give us a lot of your time today. If there's ever an industry that is still behind the times for whatever reason, it's the athletic protein powder supplement world. And I think this is also a very prime opportunity for a packaging reseller, because many of these companies are so used to these big pails or big 2-gallon, whatever that whey protein thing is. And why I share that is the project that we got involved in was, can you take, or can we take, what's in that rigid jar and put it in a flexible bag? And the design that we made here in that little black bag in the far left-hand corner on my side is what's known as a flat bottom or side gusset pouch, also a flexible bag. But what makes it unique is that style where it's got side gussets and it has the flat bottom. You can hold so much more in a very, very compact space. So to be able to take what's in that jar, put it into a flexible pouch that can be now merchandised in a smaller spot on a vitamin store or Walmart or grocery store, but obviously, right back to what we were saying before about shipping flat, storing flat, costing a lot less energy to make. And sometimes that it's just thinking these things differently. The project in particular wasn't necessarily, this customer didn't come to me and say, "Hey, I want to eliminate this jar." What I try to teach our reps, and I think you'll agree, was that that's a given. Okay, but have you ever looked at this, Mr. Customer, from a flexible bag? What do you mean? Well, if we would be able to, and a lot of times we have to, as good packaging resellers, tell a story, and to be able to explain the story and to be able to get them to understand that in this day and age now, everybody, there's a lot of, well, everybody, it's, we're all concerned about the environment, and rightfully so. And a lot of these items, when you talk about sustainable options, one of the easiest sustainable solutions that are out there is to reduce how much packaging is being used. And it's such a no-brainer for companies in this supplement space, vitamin space, protein powder space to do something very quickly, very easily. And again, the other thing that they don't realize, when you have this flat bottom bag, all of those sides, Franklin, can be printed. Now remember, that's a game changer when a lot of times what separates a product that Mr. or Mrs. person walking down the aisle will pick up and grab is the printing, is what they see. And if the graphics are bold enough and the graphics are vivid enough that somebody can see all these different areas and be able to hear the customer's story or hear the factory's story. Hey, by the way, Mr. Customer, we're reducing our plastic by 85% to help our environment. Check out what's printed on here to hear why our product is so great or good tasting or good for you or whatever. And a lot of times, if the rep can understand the big picture and to be able to explain that in those instances and get beyond just cheap price, then you really have something you could sell that customer long term.
Yeah. And what jumps out at me is when I look at that package, I see saved space in shipping.
Big
I
time.
can probably ship 2 of those boxes for what I can ship 1 of those jars for.
Correct. And
And
imagine how much now those ones, what's even better, you're talking about shipping out. Imagine
yeah,
shipping in.
right,
Imagine, because those things can't nest. Those
right,
wave things are
right.
just, you could probably get 1,000 in a certain spot. I can get 1,000 of those things probably in 2 boxes.
Yeah, square and rectangle fit side by side, whereas you're losing space when you're putting jars side by side.
100% agreed. 100%. Well, that was, I promised I wasn't, I've taken up too much of your time already.
No,
Man,
no,
I could talk to
been
you. I
fun.
could talk to you forever. And let me just wrap this up, Franklin. And a lot of times what I try to do, and again, it's okay if you don't really have an answer, but what I try to throw out to any of our guests is, whether it's packaging related or industry related or just the world we live in right now, if there's anything you could do and click your fingers to make change, sometimes it's environmentally, sometimes it's, it's just getting people to go back and having conversations with each other. I'd just be curious, anything that kind of pops out in your mind when somebody would give you a magic wand and say, Franklin, you can change anything, change it. What would you do?
Well, right off the top of my head, I couldn't think of anything other than just honesty and integrity.
I
So
agree.
is the
Yeah.
top of the list. And if
Well,
we can
and
be
that's,
honest with one
yeah.
another, then I think we could do a lot more business and do better business.
You know what? And that goes so far beyond, and I know that I threw you on the spot with that, but I wanted to say that what you said was profound, because what I heard from your story and knowing you, that's real. That's not BS. Honesty and integrity is part of who you are, and that's part of what makes you special. And that's something that, a lot of us people who are listening and watching can learn, because I think in our world, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I hope we're kind of coming full circle, Franklin. And I think in a way that if we go back to really starting out with honesty and integrity, really starting out with doing the right thing, trying to help versus trying to benefit me, whereas it's more of a give and take.
Right.
I think
Right.
our world would be a much better place.
Yeah. When we introduce ourselves to a potential customer, the first thing they're thinking is, can I trust this guy?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Franklin DeFord, we're going to do this again, my friend. And next time we're together, we're going to have a coffee or grab a burger or something.
Okay. Sounds good.
I appreciate you coming on.